In the aftermath of the Second World War, an unusual manuscript was discovered in the ruins of a British library. Simply described is an Oriental manuscript with colored drawings of native races in the Far East, including the Ladrones, Moluccas, Philippines, Java, Siam, China, and elsewhere. This lavishly illustrated 16th century compilation was purchased by a British scholar whose name it eventually bore, Charles R. Boxer. This mysterious manuscript is full of accounts of the different peoples who lived in the Philippines and other parts of Asia at the time of early Spanish contact, their customs and behavior, their clothing, their society, and even their beliefs about the world they lived in. When it comes to our origins, there are precious few primary sources that can shed light on how people in the Philippine archipelago lived before the colonial era. The manuscript known as the Boxer Codex would turn out to be a stunning artifact of Spanish colonialism and the source of our most thorough and fascinating accounts of the early societies of the Philippines.
They also say that after the man and the woman had come forth from the two bamboo nodes, the man told the woman that they would marry each other in order to multiply and have children. A little later, the woman became pregnant and gave birth at one time to a large number of boys and girls. They stayed in the house and did nothing to support themselves, much less their parents. Thus, the parents became angry at their children and decided to throw them out of the house. And so one day, the father arrived home, pretending to be very angry. The children fled, not wanting to wait for their father, seeing him so angry and fearing that he would kill them. The Bisayans say that those who entered the bedroom of the house became the ancestors of their lords and chiefs, that they call in their tongue Datu. And from those who stayed in the main living room of the house came the knights and nobles among them. They are called Timawas in their language. From those who hid behind the walls of the house descended the slaves, whom they call Olipenes. And this is what they believe was the creation and origin of humankind.
When the Philippines was established as Spain's first viable Asian colony in the late 16th century, it became a crossroads of trade and the center of one of the earliest waves of globalization. The country's strategic location made it a potential launching pad for Spanish imperial ambitions and Christian evangelization campaigns in China, Japan, and throughout Southeast Asia. This was the background for the manuscript that eventually came to be known as the Boxer Codex, a collection of reports, exploration accounts, and illustrations describing the geography, history, society, and customs of various parts of East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific.
The Indios offer everything to the Anito, which is what they call the soul when they invoke it. All of this is administered by a male priest dressed in female garb. They call him Bayog or Bayugin. If the woman is needed for the same office, she is called Catalonan. This feast terminates when everybody or most of them get drunk. This is called Maganito by the Indios. Although these Indios have no temples, they have priests and priestesses who are the principal ministers of their ceremonies, rites, and omens to whom all the important affairs are entrusted. Ordinarily, the male priests dress in women's clothes, and their manner comes across as so coquettish and swishy. They are so effeminate that one who did not know them would believe that they were women. Their function is to cure the sick with superstitious words or assist in drinking feasts by invoking the spirits of their ancestors for their purpose while conducting the ceremonies.
A prevailing theory on the manuscript's origin is that it was meant to be presented to King Philip II of Spain, to convince the monarch to launch further expeditions of conquest in Asia. This book was made to dazzle him with illustrations of exotic peoples, animals, and mythological beings, and descriptions of the fascinating customs and fabulous riches to be found in the region.
If one wants to unmarry his wife, he can do so by leaving her with what he gave her at the time of marriage, which price they call bigay, and which in Spain we call dowry. If it is the woman who wants to unmarry, she keeps nothing, and any one of the two can later remarry. Women wear on their arms many bracelets of gold and of ivory. The men also use these ordinarily. The gold ones are called ganbanes, and those of ivory, tiposos. They value highly those of ivory. They place around their necks chains of gold and consider them very pleasing and magnificent. Women place manacles or bracelets of gold and brass around their legs, since they leave their legs bare up to their knees, and they wear these bracelets around the legs with much gaiety.
Well, the motivations for the Boxer Codex are not entirely clear, but we have very good reason to believe that it was commissioned by the governor of the Spanish colony, who was Gómez Pérez Dasmariñas. And that allows us to understand that the codex was probably political in nature, and it opens a window in how the Spanish understood the place they were in relation to the various peoples of Southeast Asia, not only the Philippines, but also other areas.
The period in which the Boxer Codex perhaps has a political goal, a political project, no? as a way to relate Malacca with Manila and to try to create a new government, a new reinato in this area of the planet, beyond Goa and beyond, obviously, the New Spain, Nueva España, in Mexico. So perhaps this is a second moment in which Luis Pérez Dasmariñas thought that the Boxer Codex can help him, or this illuminated book can help to arrive to the king and to convince the king to create a new virreinato de las Indias Orientales del Sur.
Plan nila, ito ay bibigay kay King Philip II para malaman niya ang kondisyon ng sabihin natin Far East, yung tinatawag nilang Ibero-Oriental. Kaya lang, sabi rito sa introduction, hindi ito na ibigay sa hari. Sa anong dahilan, hindi nila masyado na ipaliwanag. Pero para sa akin, ang original siguro na pagpaplano nito ay bago noong taong 1588. Kapag noong 1588, si Governor Sande ay nagkaroon na ng mungkahi sa hari na magkaroon ng invasion o invasion, paglusob sa China. Dahil nakikita nila na ito ay may malaking potensyal sa mga bagay na material.
As a book, the Boxer Codex has the great advantage of having pictures. They seem to me to make it more real. Isaac Donoso Dasmariñas and his son Luis standing on the poop deck of the galleon Santiago. But this book was not for everyone. It contained top secret information about navigation. Its circulation would have been limited to high officials and new colonizers. One of their priorities was to convert to the Catholic faith the heathens whom they encountered.
Inasmuch as many of the places that have been mentioned here were those that had been of interest to Spain, even at a time when Portugal was in possession of Malacca and, of course, of the eastern part, which is the Spice Islands, it appears that this seemed to be a sort of a pool of information which were useful for the colonial authorities in the Philippines to compile as a guide and also to steer greater interest on the part of these crown authorities to develop and plan out the possibility of expanding the imperial ambit from the Philippines to these other parts of Southeast Asia, including Japan and China. And that's the reason why when these reports were actually compiled, especially in 1582, when Spain had already moved from Manila up to the northern part, the establishment of the ciudad, the Nueva Segovia in the Cagayan River in 1582 by Governor Gonzalo Ronquillo de Peñalosa became a useful jump-off point for the traveling missionaries and Spanish officials to China and Macau and even Japan later in the 1580s.
The manuscript consists of 305 leaves made of rice paper, divided into 22 sections with different authors. There is no cover, no title page, or dedication. The manuscript begins abruptly with the first section on the Ladrones, also known as the Marianas Islands, written in May 1590 by an eyewitness on board one of two galleons bound for Manila from Acapulco. The next 6 sections are all accounts of various peoples of the Philippines. Section 2 on the Cagayanes shows the anonymous author's colonialist view of the natives and their customs. The third section, about the Zambal people, depicts gruesome details of headhunting practices. The fourth section, about the people of Visayas, is heavy in anthropological detail. The fifth section is on the customs and traditions of the so-called Moros, referring to Islamized Tagalog people of Luzon rather than to Muslim peoples of Mindanao. The sixth section, on the Tagalogs, is lavishly illustrated. The figures here have appeared in countless books, artworks, and museum exhibits on the pre-Hispanic Philippines. The seventh section goes into more of the class structure and customs of the Moros. Following this are sections on Borneo and Brunei Sultanate, on the Maluku Islands, and on the Javanese. Sections 11, 12, and 13 are all authored by João Ribeiro Gallo, the Portuguese Bishop of Malacca. Addressing King Philip II, he recommends that Spain and Portugal undertake a joint invasion of Aceh, Patani, and Siam. Section 14 is an account by Portuguese adventurer Miguel Rosso de Brito on his voyages in the Maluku and Raja Ampat Islands and New Guinea. After that comes an anonymous account of Japan around 1590, during the shogunate of Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Then follows a captioned list of kingdoms paying tribute to China, with 18 elaborate portraits of men and women from Vietnam, Taiwan, Champa, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Thailand. Section 17, authored by Father Martin de Rada, is an account of an expedition to Ming Dynasty China in May 1575, with copious illustrations. The next 4 sections are also on China. These include fantastic illustrated lists depicting gods and mythological figures, as well as birds found in Chinese culture. The final section is on the customs and inhabitants of Champa. The text of the entire manuscript is all handwritten by a single scribe. The elaborate and detailed illustrations, based on their art style, are believed to be the work of one or more Chinese illustrators residing in Manila. These accounts are compiled from different authors, some named, others anonymous. They reflect a Western-centric perspective in their description of native customs, especially with regard to religious beliefs, sexual practices, and the gruesome rites of headhunting and ritual cannibalism.
Among other customs that these natives of Zambales practice is when they kill someone. They at once remove the head and incise it in a crown pattern with a bararao and suck the brains out. They then save the head or skull as treasured property and trophy, representing the number of men they have killed. And the more men they have killed and the more cruelties they have inflicted, the greater their honor. And he who has the most trophies becomes the most feared, and is thus considered the bravest and most courageous.
Despite their outsider's perspective, these accounts are rich in detail and provide an invaluable glimpse into the daily lives of the early people of the Philippines.
A form of worship they practice are the cruel maganitos, in which old women or indios dressed as women officiate. When they wish to divine something from their anito, they bring to a sala or bedroom a quantity of saucers filled with rice, crabs, oil, water, and some fresh herbs and other things asked of them. All these are cooked and placed together. The woman leader of these ceremonies remains at the side of the sick person, and talking to herself and with many posturings, she falters, then recovers and goes to the sick person to anoint oil on his head and many parts of the body, while muttering that the anito will grant him health. When the maganito is not held for a sick man, but for a betrothal or for the harvest in their fields, each one wears all the gold and precious stones he owns, and the women put on all their jewelry. If it is held for a harvest, then it is on a field which they selected for this purpose. And there they start their maganito, drinking and eating and ringing bells and other instruments, with the women and young people dancing. Thus, in the 20 or 30 days during which the feast lasts, they do not stop dancing and singing until some get tired and others take their place. While the chiefs and the brave Indios eat and drink until they fall down drunk or pass out, and are brought by their slaves and women elsewhere to sleep.
While it is not known for certain who was behind the compilation of this extraordinary manuscript, the likeliest principal sponsor is believed to be Luis Perez Dasmariñas, who authored and signed 4 addenda that were added to the manuscript. Dasmariñas had taken over as the Spanish Governor General in the Philippines after the previous governor, his father, Gomez Perez Dasmariñas, was killed by mutineers during an expedition to the Moluccas. The younger Dasmariñas served as Governor General from 1593 up to 1596, when a replacement arrived from Spain to take over the position. This left Dasmariñas free to pursue other projects. He personally financed an expedition to conquer Cambodia, for which he embarked in September 1598. Dasmariñas, like his father before him, had a great desire to conquer more lands in Asia for the Spanish crown. Based on the addenda he added to the Codex, he wished for there to be established a new Spanish viceroyalty in Manila, equal to the viceroyalty of Mexico, from which to administer these territories in the east. With Dasmariñas as its sponsor, the Codex would most likely have been compiled sometime between 1595, when he received letters from the Bishop of Malacca, and September 1598, when he left for Cambodia. But in 1603, Luis Perez Dasmariñas, like his father before him, was killed in a mutiny, the Sangli Uprising in Manila. He was not able to see the manuscript through its final destination in the hands of the king. Some scholars believe that after Dasmariñas' death, the completed pages of the manuscript were brought to Spain in 1605 by Hernando de los Rios Coronel, a ship pilot who was closely associated with both Dasmariñas' father and son. The pages were bound together into a book in Madrid in 1614. For more than 300 years, this book remained in obscurity until it was found in the collection of the Earl of Ilchester and purchased by Charles Boxer.
For the sociology, for knowing how people in Asia were living in that period, in the end of the 16th century, and it's an unvaluable document to really know with the drawings and with the text, know how, obviously under a Spanish point of view, how the people in Asia were and the scenarios of different areas in Asia appears under the Spanish eyes.
The Boxer Codex depicts the realities known to the Spanish in a particular moment. It's about 1592, the end of the 16th century, when the Spanish had been in Manila for about 20-odd years only. And therefore, it shows a relatively early stage of the colony when it was being consolidated and the peoples of the Philippines and Southeast Asia at that time. The main limitation, however, is that the Boxer Codex describes these peoples as they were perceived by the Spanish, and the Spanish didn't fully understand Filipino culture. They had, of course, learned quite a lot. Over about 20 years, they wrote quite a few accounts.
Bilang isang account na mula sa pananaw ng mga Kastila, hindi pwedeng as is na tanggapin yung kung ano yung mga obserbasyon nila eh. Kasi nga, kailangan lapatan niya ng local knowledge, yung kaalaman natin, tayo mismo bilang mga Pilipino.
And this is the point I'm driving at. At the very end of the day, the Spanish had a limited knowledge of these cultures. So we have to use these materials with caution. They open a window and they're indispensable sources because we don't have many others. But we must always bear in mind that a 16th century Spanish Catholic had different ideas about religion and about politics and about many customs. I mentioned sexual customs, that's an important part of it, but others too. So they had different ideas about what was right and what was wrong than the Filipinos, the different groups in Asia and the Philippines would have. So it is a view from outside, a view from a perspective, not a scientific view from our point of view. So we have to read with skeptical glasses. We have to ask ourselves how much of the information is accurate and how much of it is just an interpretation based on different cultural assumptions.
It was therefore important to know the local heathen practices, and these feature large in the chapters about the various peoples. Amongst them, Tagalogs, Visayans, and so-called Moros. The Spaniards were confused about Moros. They were not like the Moors of North Africa, and although some were Muslim, many were not, especially the people in and around Manila. The Muslims of Brunei and Java were a challenge to Christianity, and this shows strongly. The belligerent Bishop of Malacca wanted to propel Aceh into Christianity using maximum force. His contribution demonstrates how aggressive some Catholics could be, while others seem to have made much more effort to understand the local peoples. Around the Philippines were many other peoples who traded with them. The Spaniards desperately wanted the spices from Maluku, though they were frustrated by the Portuguese. The Chinese to the north rapidly increased their trade after the Spaniards arrived. Evidence of their involvement in the Codex is shown in the many pictures by a Chinese artist that grace it and make this a work not just for instruction and education, but also to be treasured as an art object.
The illustrations in particular reveal to us not only the physical appearance of these natives of these territories, but also of the certain features of their culture, such as in the tattoos, in their dresses, in the weapons that they were using at that time. In a way, they provide us a glimpse not only on the Filipino culture, but also on the Asian feature of the Filipino culture, which we can compare with these other territories, other groups featured in the Boxer Codex.
Although later generations of scholars have called the manuscript the Boxer Codex in his honor, Charles R. Boxer himself called it simply the Manila Manuscript. A former British intelligence officer, Boxer resigned from army service in 1947, the same year he purchased the manuscript. He was to embark on a new career, becoming a respected scholar and author specializing in colonial history. In 1950, he published an article about the manuscript in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society. Over the years, he continued to work on transcribing the text and translating some of its sections.
They have certain characters that serve them as an alphabet with which they write what they want. These look very different from the ones that we are familiar with. Women commonly know how to write with them, and when they write, they do so on top of the bark of certain pieces of bamboo, which are found in the islands. In using these little tablets, which are 4 fingers wide, they do not write with ink, but with some stylus that breaks the surface and bark of the bamboo. For this purpose, they have letters that total only 17. Each letter is a syllable, and with certain little points placed to one side or the other of a letter, or above or below, they compose words and write and say with these whatever they wish.
In 1957, eminent Filipino historian, author, and future national artist for historical literature, Carlos Quirino, wrote to Boxer. Quirino had read about the Manila manuscript and was hoping to either purchase it from Boxer or make a copy. This was the beginning of years of friendship and collaboration between the two scholars. With Boxer's help, Quirino was able to obtain a photostat copy of the manuscript and published a 2-part article about it in the Philippines Free Press. Quirino, together with Mauro Garcia, published a translated and annotated version of 5 of the 6 sections that dealt with the Philippines. Over the years, a number of scholars published their transcriptions, translations, and studies of various sections of the Codex. In 2013, Isaac Donoso published the first complete modern transcription of the Codex. This transcription then formed the basis for an all-new translation by Maria Luisa Garcia, where she edited the classic translation of Quirino and Mauro Garcia to match the new transcription, and translating many of the non-Philippine sections of the book for the first time. In 2016, this work was published as a new complete bilingual edition of the Boxer Codex. Published by Vibal Foundation, this acclaimed bilingual version, edited by Isaac Donoso, is being reissued in a new edition with a brand new cover. This second edition is being launched in July 2021. This invaluable work is made accessible to a new generation of Filipinos and scholars, written in modern Spanish and English. It features an extensive introduction discussing the historical and global context of the manuscript and the scholarly friendship between Charles Boxer and Carlos Quirino.
The widow of a chief covers herself with a curtain and in 4 days eats nothing, because it is said that if this is not done, he would turn mad. During the time of mourning, a priest dances around the mourner while chanting. If the deceased person or his parents had slaves, they all shave their heads in mourning, and all the male relatives likewise. The female relatives cut their hair, but only partly. None of the relatives wear silk or gold ornaments for a long time. The men wear collars of rattan on some parts of the body, and the women on the wrists. They do not bathe or end their mourning until they kill a person. Then they remove the collars, hold a solemn drinking feast, and end their mourning.
This can provide us a substantial compendium of materials on the pre-colonial Philippines. And for this reason, this would be a very, very important source of information for those who are interested to reconstruct the Philippine society even before the coming of Spain without, of course, recourse to archaeological data, simply by going to these surviving details that had been written by those who have witnessed the pre-colonial society at its twilight with the coming of Spain in the 1560s.
Scholarship, this is as a treasure, as a source, as a primary source, it's a treasure in which we can find endless data for many, many topics related with many areas in the whole Asia, not only for Philippines, but for Thailand, but for Malaysia, for Indonesia, for Japan, for China, for the Pacific Islands, for one. So therefore, we are in front of a massive treasure of information that certainly with the text is already important, but the text is accompanied, is supplied with a wonderful collection of drawings, and this makes the Boxer Codex a wonderful treasure of Asia at the end of the 16th century.
Kaya't ang kahalagahan sa palagay ko nitong codex ay hindi sapagkat may elaborasyon ng mga kultura ng mga Pilipino, sapagkat inenagawa na ng ibang mga chroniclers, ano? Tulad nga nila Plasencia at Alcina. Ang mas nakikita kong kahalagahan nito ay doon sa antas na geopolitical, yung ano ba nangyayari dito sa Asia noong mga panahong yon. Ngayon, ang talagang significance nitong Boxer Codex, yung pagkaunawa sa geopolitics ng rehiyon ng Iberian Orient. Kung paano tinitingnan ng Europa itong lugar natin, lalo na yung kinalalagyan ngayon ng ating West Philippine Sea, patungo ng Indonesia, hanggang makarating ka ng Strait of Malacca at saka Malay Peninsula. No? Yung mga region na yan.
It's a wonderful material. It's a fantastic resource. It gives us something we really don't easily find, which is a detailed account of some beliefs, of some customs, of how people look like, and not only in the Philippines, but also, as I said, all across Southeast Asia. It is extremely important. We can continue to learn a lot from it. We can learn two different kinds of things, and in some ways I'm going back to some points I've raised, but I'm going to go deeper now. We can learn about the societies the Spanish encountered, but we can also learn about the way the Spanish interpreted those societies. And we can also learn about how the Chinese artists working for the Spanish depicted those societies. So it's a dual vision dominated by the Spanish narrative, but with intervention of a Chinese artistic tradition. another important point is that this account is not written from the point of view of a missionary. So it gives us the view of the layman, the secular conqueror, or, and I would argue in this case, the secretary of the governor of the Philippines, the bureaucratic elites of Manila, settled in Manila, how they interpreted the social and cultural realities of the peoples of the Philippines. So this is very important, and this will continue to be central to our research.
As the world changes and the balance between East and West shifts, mutual understanding becomes more and more important. The Boxer Codex gives us insight into how things were before Westerners arrived. It's an immensely valuable part of the written resources we have for the pre-colonial history of the Philippines, and we have very few. The Boxer Codex also exposes prejudices and misunderstandings we should strive to avoid repeating. Studying the past makes us better able to understand and appreciate people from all backgrounds.
The Boxer Codex is perhaps the clearest picture we have of the lives of pre-colonial Filipinos and the society of early modern Asia. Apart from telling us about the people and places described within its accounts, the book also teaches us about those who authored it, the aspirations and worldviews of the adventurers who sought to conquer the region for the Spanish crown. The Boxer Codex remains a rare treasure as an artifact of our early history.